Have you ever felt like your life was a perfect, beautiful dream, and then, in a single heartbeat, you wake up to a nightmare? This is a story about a woman who had it all: a loving fiancé, a life of luxury, and a baby on the way. But one cruel lie shattered her world into a million pieces. It's a story of hitting rock bottom, only to find that sometimes the ground you land on is more solid than the castle you fell from. Prepare for a journey of heartbreak, resilience, and the surprising places we find true love. Amelia was a quiet soul, an art history major who found more comfort in museums than in boardrooms. Raised by her kind grandfather in a small Ohio town after her parents' tragic accident, she always dreamed of a life bigger than her humble beginnings. She moved to Chicago, hoping to make her way, but the city was overwhelming. Jobs were scarce for someone with her degree. Just as despair began to set in, she landed an interview at Vance Construction, one of the city's top firms. She wasn't just hired as an assistant, she was chosen by the CEO himself, the impossibly handsome and charismatic Ethan Vance. For Amelia, it was a fairy tale. He was everything she'd ever dreamed of: powerful, sophisticated, and attentive. Within a year, she wasn't just his indispensable assistant, she was his fiancée, living in a stunning high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, with his baby growing inside her. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Lincoln Park apartment, glinting off the diamond ring on Amelia's finger. She was humming, making coffee, thinking about wedding venues. Just yesterday, they were tasting cakes. The quiet click of the front door opening startled her. Ethan was home early. She turned to greet him with a smile, but it froze on her face. His expression was one she'd never seen before, a mask of cold, controlled fury. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes like chips of ice. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "Did something happen at the office?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past her, his expensive shoes silent on the polished hardwood floor. He went straight to the walk-in closet they shared, his side a perfect row of tailored suits, hers a collection of beautiful dresses he'd bought for her. It felt like a stranger had entered their home. "Get your things," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. He pulled open a drawer and tossed her passport onto the bed. "What are you talking about, Ethan? Are we going somewhere?" Amelia's mind raced. A surprise trip? But his face held no surprise, only chilling finality. "You're going somewhere," he clarified, turning to face her fully. "Out. I want you out of my apartment. Now." The words didn't make sense. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. "This is a joke, right?" "It's not funny." A nervous laugh escaped her lips, but it sounded fragile and broken in the heavy silence of the room. He just stared at her, his contempt a physical force. "The only joke here was me thinking you were different. I know everything, Amelia, so save the performance. Pack a bag with whatever you came here with, and leave." He gestured toward the door, a dismissive flick of his wrist that felt like a slap. All the warmth drained from her body, leaving a terrifying hollow cold. "Know everything? Know what?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring his hardened face. "I don't understand what you're accusing me of." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't play innocent with me. It's pathetic." He pulled his phone from his pocket and thrust it in her face. The screen showed a series of grainy, intimate photos. A woman with long dark hair like hers, in a hotel room, with another man. His face was obscured, but the woman, from behind, it could have been her. "Who is that?" she breathed, horrified. "That's not me, Ethan. I swear." He snatched the phone back. "Of course it's not. But it's a good enough likeness, isn't it? Sent by a very reliable source. Now get out. I have people coming to change the locks in an hour." He was her fiancé, the father of her child, and he was looking at her as if she were garbage to be thrown away. Numb with shock, she stumbled into the bedroom and grabbed an old duffel bag from the back of the closet. Her hands trembled as she threw in a pair of jeans, a few sweaters, her toiletries. She didn't even think to argue about the expensive clothes and jewellery he had gifted her. They felt tainted now, like props in a play where she had just been brutally written out of the script. He stood in the doorway watching her, his arms crossed, a sentinel guarding his fortress against the woman he had promised to love forever. As she zipped the bag, her hand instinctively went to her stomach, the tiny life inside her. "Ethan, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Our baby! You can't do this to us." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face, but it wasn't compassion. It was revulsion. "Don't you dare use that to manipulate me," he hissed. "Find the real father and send him the bill." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the echo of his cruelty. Desperate, she followed him into the pristine living room. "I can't just leave. I have nowhere to go. My job." He cut her off, his tone laced with venom. "You don't have a job. I just had HR process your termination. At-will employment. Your things from the office will be couriered to wherever you crawl off to." It was a complete annihilation. He wasn't just ending their relationship. He was erasing her from his life, severing every tie with surgical precision. He opened the front door, the sounds of the city rushing in. "Your key," he said, holding out his hand. She stared at him, this man who had held her and whispered promises in her ear just last night. He was a stranger, a monster wearing a familiar face. With a shaking hand, she pulled the ring from her finger. The diamond that had symbolized their future now felt like a shard of glass. She placed it in his palm along with the apartment key. He closed his fingers around them without a word and stepped aside. The message was clear. Get out. Her life was officially over. The only person she could think of was Chloe, her friend from a temp job she'd had before meeting Ethan. Shaking and sobbing, Amelia called her from a coffee shop, explaining the unbelievable nightmare. Chloe was horrified and immediately told her to come over to her small apartment in Wicker Park. The moment Amelia walked in, Chloe wrapped her in a hug, and Amelia finally allowed herself to break down completely. "I warned you he was too good to be true," Chloe said gently, making her a cup of tea. "Men with that much money and power, they don't play by the same rules, Mia." Amelia just nodded, unable to speak through her tears. For the first few days, Chloe was a lifesaver. She let Amelia cry, listened to her frantic denials, and tried to make sense of the senseless. But as days turned into a week, the atmosphere began to shift. Chloe was struggling financially, worried about getting laid off from her own job, and the strain of housing a heartbroken, unemployed friend began to show. Chloe's comforting words slowly turned into thinly veiled jabs. "You know, you never did save any money while you were with him, did you?" she asked one evening, while they ate cheap takeout pizza. "You just let him pay for everything." Amelia flinched. I was putting most of my salary toward my old student loans, and he insisted on paying for things." Chloe sighed, a sound heavy with frustration. "Right. Well, a queen needs her castle. You just forgot to check if it was built on sand." The comments stung, each one a little reminder that she was a burden. Amelia spent her days frantically searching for jobs online, but her resume was now poisoned. A short, high-level stint as a CEO's assistant, followed by an abrupt termination, was a massive red flag. She knew Ethan wouldn't give her a good reference. He had effectively blacklisted her. The small apartment felt like it was shrinking, filled with unspoken tension and the weight of Amelia's failure. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Chloe came home from work, looking exhausted and defeated. "They're downsizing," she said, dropping her keys on the counter. "My whole department got cut. I'm out of a job." Amelia's heart sank. "Oh, Chloe, I'm so sorry." Chloe ran a hand through her hair, not meeting Amelia's eyes. "Look, Mia, I'm going to have to sublet this place and move back in with my parents for a while. The new tenant is moving in next week." The implication hung in the air between them, sharp and unavoidable. There was no room for Amelia in Chloe's new, desperate plans. It wasn't malicious, just a harsh reality. Amelia had to go. "I understand," Amelia said quietly, though her stomach was churning with panic. She had no family, no savings, and no prospects. She was truly, completely alone in the sprawling, indifferent city. Her options had dwindled to nothing, except for one. A last, desperate resort she had run away from years ago. There was only one place left on earth that was hers, her grandfather's house in Havenwood, Ohio, a place she hadn't seen in 4 years since his funeral. She'd left the house to stand empty, a silent monument to a past she was eager to escape. Using the last of her cash, she bought a one-way bus ticket. The journey was a long, grey blur of interstate highways and anonymous rest stops. She watched the glittering skyline of Chicago disappear, replaced by the flat, frozen fields of the Midwest. With every mile, she felt her sophisticated city life peeling away, leaving behind the small-town girl she thought she'd outgrown. She remembered Grandpa Joe, his calloused hands and kind eyes, how he'd raised her after the crash. He had always encouraged her to leave to find a better life. Now she was returning, defeated, and carrying a secret, a failure. The thought brought a fresh wave of shame. The bus dropped her off at a desolate crossroads as dusk began to settle. The walk to the house was over a mile down a cracked asphalt road. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, a scent she hadn't realised she'd forgotten. The house appeared at the end of the lane, a dark silhouette against the bruised purple sky. It looked smaller, sadder than she remembered. The white paint was peeling, the porch sagged on one side, and weeds choked the pathway. It was a perfect reflection of how she felt inside, neglected, broken, and abandoned. She found the old iron key still hidden under a loose stone by the porch steps, just where her grandfather had always kept it. The lock groaned in protest, but finally gave way. She pushed the heavy door open and was met with a blast of frigid, musty air. The house was colder inside than out. It was the smell of dust, decay, and profound loneliness. She set her duffel bag down on a rickety chair, her breath misting in the air. The floral wallpaper was faded and bubbling away from the walls. A fine layer of dust covered every surface, preserving the house exactly as it was the day she had locked it up and left. It was a tomb of old memories. Her gaze fell on the old cast-iron wood stove in the corner. Beside it, a small stack of split logs sat waiting, just as her grandfather had left them. A small act of foresight from a man long gone. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered, into the crushing silence, her voice thick with emotion. She felt a desperate need to talk to him, to seek his guidance, knowing it was impossible. He was the only person who had ever loved her unconditionally, and now she needed that love more than ever. But there was no one left to give it. The weight of her solitude pressed down on her, and she sank to the dusty floor, too exhausted to even cry. After a few minutes of numb despair, a primal need for warmth took over. Shivering, Amelia found an old box of matches and a stack of yellowed newspapers. She crumpled the paper, arranged the kindling, and struck a match. The flame flickered to life, a tiny orange beacon in the gloom. Slowly the dry wood caught, and a soft, crackling sound filled the silence. It was a familiar, comforting sound from her childhood. She knelt before the stove, stretching her frozen hands toward the growing heat. As warmth began to seep back into her fingers, the tears she'd been holding back finally came. A storm of grief for her lost future, for her grandfather, for the mess she had made of her life. She wept until she was empty, until only the quiet hiss and pop of the fire remained. The house was small, and as the stove worked its magic, the oppressive chill in the main room began to recede. It was a start. Darkness had fallen completely outside. Black shadows clawed at the corners of the room. Instinctively, she reached for the light switch on the wall and flipped it. Nothing happened. She tried the switch in the other room, with the same result. The bulbs themselves didn't look burnt out. Of course, the electricity was probably disconnected, or a fuse had blown years ago. Another problem to solve tomorrow. Tonight, she would have to live by firelight. It was only then that she remembered she hadn't eaten since a stale pastry at a bus station that morning. The hunger was a dull ache in her stomach. How surreal it was to think that just a few weeks ago, She was browsing menus at Michelin-star restaurants with Ethan, searching for a dessert she hadn't tried yet. That life felt like it belonged to someone else. Now her reality was 2 protein bars and a bottle of water from her bag, eaten on a dusty tablecloth she'd shaken out on the table. She decided to sleep in her old childhood room. The bed was still there, covered by a heavy, musty quilt. Too exhausted to even undress, she curled up on top of the covers, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She thought the long journey would grant her a quick, dreamless sleep. But her mind wouldn't shut down. Memories swirled, old and new. She remembered the joy of leaving this town, the thrill of the city, the heady feeling of falling in love with Ethan. She had been so sure he was her destiny. How could she have been so blind? He had isolated her subtly at first. He'd discouraged her friendships, scoffed at her art history background, and moulded her into the perfect polished accessory for his life. She had let him, convincing herself it was a small price to pay for a life of security and love. But the love was conditional, and the security was an illusion. Sleep finally came, but it was restless, filled with shadows and the feeling of falling. A loud, authoritative voice from outside shattered her sleep. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Amelia shot up in bed, her heart hammering. The morning light was a weak, grey filter through the dirty window. The voice came again, closer this time. "This is private property. I know someone's here. The chimney's smoking." Before she could even process what was happening, a figure appeared in the bedroom doorway. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood silhouetted against the light from the other room. He looked surprised to see her. "Whoa, sorry. I didn't mean to barge in. The front door was unlocked. I thought maybe some squatters had moved in." He stepped into the room, and she could see him more clearly. He had kind, grey eyes and tousled brown hair. He was around her age, dressed in jeans and a worn leather jacket. He looked more concerned than threatening, but her guard was up. "And what makes you so sure I'm not a squatter?" she asked, her voice raspy with sleep and defensiveness. She pulled the dusty quilt up to her chin. He gave a small, disarming smile. "Well, for starters, you don't look the part, though it looks like you've had a rough night." She instinctively ran a hand through her tangled hair. He was right, she must have looked a mess. "I'm Amelia," she said, softening slightly. "This was my grandfather's house." Understanding dawned on his face. "You're Joe's granddaughter. I'm Liam. I'm the local mail carrier. I saw the smoke and got worried. We have to keep an eye out for each other around here." He gestured around the room. "So you're back, planning on fixing the place up?" "Something like that," she said vaguely. "First, I need to figure out the electricity." A flicker of interest crossed his face. "I can take a look at that. I dabble a bit." Amelia was hesitant. She was in no position to pay a handyman, and she was wary of accepting help from a stranger. "You know about wiring," he chuckled. "Don't worry, I won't burn the place down. I've done more than my share of renovations." Before she could protest further, he said, "I'll find the breaker box myself. You just take it easy. Looks like you could use it." He left the room, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. A strange mix of annoyance and relief washed over her. It was unnerving to have someone take charge in her home, but at the same time, the thought of having light and power again was a powerful lure. She heard him moving around, the clang of a metal box opening in the hallway. A few moments later, he called out, "Okay, give the switch a try." She reached over and flipped the switch by her bed. With a soft hum, the bare bulb on the ceiling flickered to life, casting a warm yellow glow. It felt like a miracle. She went out to the main room where Liam was flipping other switches, confirming his work. Every light in the small house was now working. It was just the main breaker and a couple of ancient fuses, he explained, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans. "Thank you so much," she said, truly grateful. "How much do I owe you?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it. Consider it a welcome back to the neighbourhood gift. We don't get many new, returning residents." He smiled again, and she noticed how it made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Seriously, if you need anything else, just ask. I live in the house with the green shutters, down past the general store. You can't miss it." With a final nod, he was gone, leaving the house feeling brighter and somehow less lonely than before. His unexpected kindness was a small crack of light in her overwhelming darkness. For the first time in weeks, she felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope. Fueled by that spark, Amelia spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. The work was grueling, but it was exactly what she needed. It kept her body moving and her mind occupied. She scrubbed away years of dust, swept up cobwebs, and aired out the musty rooms. She found old sheets to cover the worn furniture and washed the few dishes left in the cupboards. With each small act of cleaning, she felt like she was reclaiming not just the house but a piece of herself. The physical labour was grounding, a stark contrast to the abstract high-stakes world of corporate Chicago. Here, her efforts produced tangible results: a clean floor, a polished table, a clear window. By evening, the house was still old and poor, but it was clean. It was hers. She heated up a can of soup on the small electric stove she'd found, the simple meal more satisfying than any fancy dinner she'd had with Ethan. A week slipped by. Amelia established a quiet routine. Days were spent on small home repairs, and evenings were spent reading old paperbacks she found on a shelf. The quiet was a balm for her frayed nerves, but her food supplies were dwindling, and she couldn't put it off any longer. She had to go to the town's general store. The store was a time capsule, with wooden floors that creaked and shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to hardware. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged woman named Carol, recognized her immediately. "Amelia! My goodness, look at you! We heard you were back." News travelled fast in Havenwood. Amelia managed a small smile and endured a barrage of polite but probing questions, giving vague answers about taking a long vacation. She bought basics: pasta, flour, eggs, milk, enough to last a while. The bag was heavier than she anticipated, and the walk home felt twice as long. The plastic handles of the grocery bag were cutting into her fingers, and she had to stop every few yards to switch hands. She cursed herself for not buying less or making 2 trips. Just as she was about to drop the bag in frustration, a familiar voice called out, "Looks like you could use a hand with that." It was Liam, walking toward her from his house with the green shutters. Without waiting for an answer, he took the heavy bag from her, his grip easy and strong. "Trying to feed an army?" he teased, his smile warm. "Just trying to avoid another trip to the store for a while," she admitted, rubbing her sore fingers. They walked together in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, you're kind of a mystery, Amelia. You show up out of the blue, camp out in a rundown house. People are talking." He said it not with a gossipy tone, but with genuine curiosity. "Let them talk," she said, a hint of her old weariness creeping back into her voice. "There isn't much of a story to tell." "I doubt that," he replied gently. They had reached her gate. He followed her inside and set the grocery bag on her kitchen table. "Listen, I know it's none of my business, but if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm a pretty good listener." He looked at her, his gaze direct and sincere. She felt a sudden sharp urge to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the whole ugly story, but the shame was still too raw. She just nodded. "Thank you, Liam. I appreciate it." After he left, she unpacked the groceries, his offer echoing in her mind. For the first time, she considered the possibility that she didn't have to carry this immense weight all by herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust someone again. The next day, Liam showed up with a toolbox and a stack of lumber. "Your front porch is a death trap," he announced without preamble. "I had some spare wood. Thought I'd fix it before you fall through." Amelia was stunned. "Liam, you can't keep doing things for me for free." He just grinned and started prying up a rotten board. "Sure I can. But if it'll make you feel better, you can pay me back. My mom, she's sick, has trouble with her legs. I have to drive into the city for a meeting with a client tomorrow, and I don't like leaving her alone all day. Could you sit with her?" Relief washed over Amelia. It was a trade, an exchange of services. "Of course," she said immediately. "I'd be happy to. He paused his work and looked at her. You know, I'm not just a mailman. I'm an architect. I work remotely. That's why I was able to move back here for my mom. The revelation surprised her, and she felt a new level of respect for him. The following morning, she walked over to his house. It was as well kept on the inside as it was on the out. His mother, Valentina, was a woman with a gentle smile and the same kind eyes as her son. She sat in a comfortable armchair, a knitted blanket over her lap. They hit it off instantly. Valentina was a wonderful storyteller, sharing tales of Havenwood in its heyday and of Liam as a boy. She didn't ask Amelia a single prying question about her past, instead treating her with a simple, maternal warmth that Amelia hadn't realised how much she missed. They spent the day talking, looking through photo albums, and drinking tea. For the first time in months, Amelia felt completely at ease. She felt seen. When Liam returned that evening, he found them laughing over an old story. "Looks like you two are getting along," he said, a pleased smile on his face. "She's a keeper, Liam," Valentina said, winking at Amelia. A few days later, Liam made another offer. "I saw your laptop, and I know you have an art history degree. I have a project designing the interior for a boutique hotel, and I'm swamped. I need help with research, mood boards, sourcing materials. It's paid, of course, remotely, if you're interested." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. It was a chance to use her skills, to feel competent and useful again. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'm very interested." Working with Liam was a revelation. He was brilliant, patient, and collaborative. He valued her opinions and respected her aesthetic eye. They would spend hours on video calls, discussing designs and ideas. A natural partnership formed between them, built on mutual respect and a shared creative vision. Her life began to take on a new, quiet rhythm. Work, walks through the woods, and frequent visits with Valentina. The gaping wound in her heart began to slowly, carefully knit itself back together. One afternoon in mid-December, as a light snow began to fall, an expensive-looking sedan crunched up the gravel of her driveway. Amelia, who was outside bringing in firewood, froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was it Ethan? Had he found her? But the man who got out of the car wasn't Ethan. It was Marcus, Ethan's former second-in-command. He looked out of place in his tailored suit against the rustic backdrop of her home. "Amelia," he said, a slick smile on his face. "Took me forever to find this place. You look, well." She stared at him, confused and wary. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I came to offer you a job," he said, getting straight to the point. "I left Vance Construction, started my own firm. I need a good assistant, and I immediately thought of you. I'll even pay you more than Ethan did." He was trying to sound generous, but something in his eyes was off. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "Why would you come all this way to offer me a job?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Chicago is full of assistants." He sighed dramatically. "Because I owe you an apology and an explanation." He looked around at her small, repaired house with a dismissive air. "You don't belong here, Amelia. Let's go inside. It's a long story." Reluctantly, she let him in. He told her everything. How Ethan, paranoid and insecure, had tasked him with testing her loyalty before the wedding. He wanted Marcus to make a move on her, to see if she would take the bait. "And I did it," Marcus confessed, a strange mix of pride and shame in his voice. "But not for him. I did it for me. I've wanted you since the day you walked into that office. I knew this was my only chance to get him out of the picture." He then explained the rest of the sordid tale, hiring a look-alike, staging the photos, and delivering the evidence to an already suspicious Ethan. He had engineered her downfall. The room tilted. Every cruel word Ethan had said, every ounce of her pain and humiliation, it was all based on a lie, a sick, twisted game played by two men who saw her as a prize to be won or a possession to be tested. Marcus seemed to mistake her stunned silence for consideration. I know it was a messed up thing to do, he continued, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur. But it was the only way. He never deserved you. I do. Come back to Chicago with me, Amelia. Be my partner. In business and in life. I'll take care of you and the baby. We can have the life you were meant to have. He reached for her hand, but she recoiled as if he were a snake. The audacity of it, the sheer arrogance, was breathtaking. He thought he could destroy her life and then offer to sell her a new one, as if she were a commodity he had successfully acquired. "Get out," she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage she didn't know she possessed. He looked genuinely surprised. "What? Amelia, don't be like this. I did this for you. For us. There is no us," she finally yelled, the sound ripping from her throat. "You are a despicable, pathetic man. You and Ethan both. You deserve each other." Just then, the front door opened. Liam walked in, holding a small bag of groceries. He had a key now. He stopped short, taking in the scene. The expensive car outside, the slick stranger in the suit, and the furious, pained look on Amelia's face. "Is everything all right here?" Liam asked, his friendly demeanour gone, replaced by a protective stillness. Marcus sneered. "Ah, I see. You found a local replacement. How quaint." "I said get out," Amelia repeated, her voice like steel. "Before I call the sheriff." Marcus gave Liam a final, contemptuous look, then turned and stormed out of the house, the door slamming behind him. The moment he was gone, the anger drained out of Amelia, leaving her shaking. Liam was at her side instantly, his hand warm and steady on her arm. "Who was that?" he asked softly. And this time, she didn't hold back. The whole story came pouring out of her. The whirlwind romance, the pregnancy, Ethan's cruelty, Marcus's betrayal, all of it. She cried as she spoke, and Liam just listened, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to a deep, profound empathy. He didn't interrupt. He just held her hand, letting her release all the poison she had been holding inside for months. When she was finished, exhausted and empty, he gently pulled her into a hug. She leaned against him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the safest she had felt in a very long time. "He's a fool," Liam said quietly, his voice rumbling against her ear. "Any man who would let you go is a fool." Weeks later, her phone rang, displaying a number she had tried to forget. It was Ethan. His voice was smooth, confident, as if no time had passed. "Amelia, I know everything," Marcus confessed. "It was all a set-up. I was wrong." He spoke as if he were closing a business deal that had gone awry. "I'm on my way to get you. We'll start over. The wedding is back on." Amelia stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard where Liam was building a snowman. She felt nothing for the voice on the phone. No anger, no love, only a distant pity. "There is no us anymore, Ethan," she said calmly. "I'm not a contract. You can renegotiate." She ended the call before he could reply, and blocked his number. She had finally closed that chapter for good. A few minutes later, Liam came inside, his cheeks red from the cold. He looked at her, his expression serious. "Amelia," he began, taking both of her hands in his. "I love you. And I already love this baby as if he or she were my own. I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. Her answer was a simple, heartfelt yes. The black cloud had finally lifted, not just because a new love had begun, but because she had found herself again in the last place she ever expected to look. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. What do you think is more important in a relationship? Passionate excitement or quiet, steadfast support?